So let me, to the Global Board and also to the firm as a whole, one of the things that Juan and I and Simon and Jay thought would be generally a good idea would be to give the firm as a whole an idea as to the kind of conversations that go on at the Global Board level and how robust they are and how important they are to the evolution and integration of the firm over 11 years. We could not be more fortunate than to have had senior leaders like Senator Mitchell from almost the beginning of the firm coming together, certainly from the beginning of since 2005 for sure, and now in a more and more prominent role, President Aznar, who has provided invaluable advice to the firm in Europe and now also as we continue to build out our initiative in South America. A good example for the firm of what the kind of issues are that we are faced with are the topsy-turvy political environment that we live in all over the world, and there is no two people that are better equipped to give us their insights and perspectives on that than Senator Mitchell and President Aznar.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we thought as a global board is that it's good to share with the broader firm some of the topics that we are looking into in terms of fostering the global firm and its integration. And obviously the geopolitical analysis that we will be having from President Aznar and Senator Mitchell is going to be of great value for all of us, but more importantly for the firm as a whole in terms of projecting or at least guessing what the future is going to be like, which I think is going to be, despite all the challenges, is going to be a good future for a firm like us with the unique platform that we have. So it's really an opportunity to first listen to them, take some good notes, and more importantly, share it with the wider firm and get feedback from the people, which is the intent of this broadcasting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Gentlemen?
Well, I said to President Aznar that in every country with which I'm familiar, the president outranks the senator. And so I invited him to go first, but with his usual courtesy, he insisted that I proceed first, so I'll do that and try not to take the whole time myself and leave time for the president to make some comments. Let me begin, Roger and Juan, with two personal comments. I had the great privilege of chairing the first meeting of this global board, and most of them for the first several years of the firm's existence. And it's personally gratifying to me to see what tremendous strides have been made over the time that our firm has existed, and my congratulations to the current leaders of the firm, all of whom have commented here today on what I think is real progress in achieving and in some cases exceeding the goals that were originally established. So it's really nice to be here in that respect, and it's a personal pleasure for me to be here with President Aznar, who I've had the pleasure of knowing for many years, and we've appeared together in other forums, so it's nice to be here. I'll make very brief comments. In the past few months, I've traveled extensively in Europe, the Middle East, and parts of Asia. And the first, second, and third questions have all involved the new administration in the United States. So let me get into that. Briefly on our domestic economy. The American economy is by far the world's largest and strongest, is growing. I see very good prospects in both the near and midterm for our economy. We've had 84 consecutive months of private sector job growth. In the past 12 months, the average has been about 225,000 new jobs each month, a substantial figure, even allowing for population growth, which continues. And as we've all seen by the Federal Reserve decision in just the last few days to begin a process of ticking interest rates up, the prospects are for continued strong growth. Those programs on which the administration and Congress are likely to agree, in particular an infrastructure program and some form of tax cuts, will further stimulate the economy. So I think in the foreseeable future, the American economy, already at $19 trillion in comparison to China, which is now at about 11 trillion, I think will remain strong and should be a good source of growth for our firm and for the companies that we serve. What danger signs there are, I think, lie in foreign relations and foreign issues. I'll try to be concise on subjects that really do require some extensive commentary. I think the dangers are threefold. First, North Korea poses a serious threat to stability, not just in the Pacific region, but through a triggering mechanism, it could spread much beyond that particular region. You have a highly unstable leadership in the most closed society in the world, now approaching the point at which they're able to combine intercontinental ballistic missiles with nuclear warheads that will fit on them, that would pose a direct threat, not just to the countries in the region, most importantly South Korea and Japan, but could extend all the way across the Pacific. That poses a tremendous threat of instability, and no one can realistically ignore the possibility of the use of such weapons. So how to deal with that is difficult. It's become fashionable for all American politicians to say, well, the Chinese should be doing it. It's true, it's in the Chinese interest to have stability in the region, but that comment ignores the reality that the long-term interests of the United States and China with respect to North Korea are diametrically opposed. The last thing China wants is the collapse of the North Korean government and the unification of Korea in a Western-oriented, particularly U.S.-oriented alliance that would place American military forces on China's border. And so our ultimate objective is the exact opposites of China's. While they want stability, while they don't like what's going on, they don't want that regime to collapse and be replaced by one dominated by the South. And that makes finding a resolution extremely difficult, and I fear we're headed for a genuine and meaningful crisis there. The other danger areas to me are twofold and related. As an American, I respect the Brexit vote in the UK as the democratic expression of a free people. But I believe it to be a profoundly mistaken decision. The European Union, NATO, the United Nations, the World Bank, and other institutions were created by Western democracies after the Second World War at the urging and with the leadership of the United States. While they deal with financial, military, economic matters, they are taken as a whole essentially a massive peace project. Europe was devastated by three major land wars in 1870, 1914, and 1939. And the principal objective of these institutions was to entangle the nations of Europe and beyond in a series of economic, political, and military relationships that would make less likely that type of conflict. And while the European Union, like every other human institution, has many faults and mistakes and bureaucratic bungling, in its central purpose, the maintaining of stability and peace and prosperity in Europe and beyond, it has been successful. And I find it alarming and disturbing that our president urges other European countries to take their own Brexits, which would lead to the dissolution of the European Union, in my judgment, to the detriment of the people of Europe, but very much to the detriment of the United States. I think we should be doing all we can to encourage Europeans to move forward as best they can in their own way to maintain the Union and NATO, in particular in view of the threats coming from a somewhat resurgent Russian government. The only other area I'll comment on is the area of nuclear weapons. The United States led the world into the nuclear age and has led the effort to restrain their dissemination with considerable success. Although dozens of countries in the world have the capability to produce nuclear weapons, only 9 have done so. The vast majority voluntarily refrain from exercising that capability in reliance upon the United States and the nuclear non-proliferation regime. Undermining that regime at a time when North Korea poses a threat, at a time when the internal divisions within Islam are producing a tremendous turbulence throughout the Middle East and North Africa, a series of governments unable to meet the basic needs of their people, plagued by unrest and very rapidly growing populations. I digress. 1 in 5 persons on earth today is Muslim, 1.5 billion. By 2060, when the world's population approaches 10 billion, 1 in 3 will be Muslim, 3.5 billion. That was the total population of the world as recently as 1970. And those internal divisions are now intense, expanding, and there is almost certain to be tremendous turbulence across a broad swath of Asia and North Africa for as far as we can see. That means an increase in non-government organizations who have as their highest priority gaining access to nuclear materials. They may be among the groups willing to use them because they don't possess, for the most part, or control national territories and national populations, and therefore are not subject to the retaliatory effect that led to the creation of the nuclear deterrence regime. This is a very risky and dangerous course, and very unfortunately the President has said and not retracted that it would be a good thing if South Korea and Japan and Saudi Arabia got nuclear weapons so that the United States would not have to defend them. That's a very dangerous path, and I hope that the administration will change that policy to one of strong support for an improved and enhanced and even more effective non-proliferation regime. A lot rests on that around the world, because the two dangers are, in a world in which you have many unstable governments, you could have an outbreak of conflict between nation states. The other, I think, far greater is the one I just mentioned, that non-government terror groups gain access to fissile materials without the restraints that apply to governments who might have them, and they might be willing to use them and trigger exchanges, the consequences of which cannot be foreseen. So I think in economic terms, I think there's going to be a good period ahead. In relations between nations, I think the internal conflicts that have produced turbulence in Asia and Africa and the Middle East will continue, and there are threats to stability in the West, but I think they can be overcome with sound and sensible policies that are in the national interest of not just the countries of Europe, but also very much the United States. So with that, Mr. President, I yield to you.
Well, thank you very much, Senator. For me, it's a pleasure to share with you this opportunity, and it's a pleasure that in your condition of senatorial condition, you can speak and explain your remarks before me. And I agree basically with you explain and your concerns about the evolution of some problems in the world in the current circumstances. But first of all, I must to express my gratitude to Juan and Roger for this possibility, and I am very proud to be member of this house, of this firm, and I have not the privilege to attend the first meeting of the GlobalBoard 7 years ago. I began in after some years after, but the evolution of the GlobalBoard, the evolution of the firm is very, very impressive, and I express I can congratulate all of you, especially Juan and Roger. And I am sure that is in these times of uncertainty, of unpredictable times, we have a very, very, very serious opportunity to reinforce our firm, to reinforce our company, to extend our business and our influence, and to take advantage of a lot of opportunities that I'm sure we find in our way, in our work everywhere, in all the continents that you work in. From European perspective, I want to explain that, in my view, personal view, that the European Union living now an existential crisis. It's not a classical crisis in the European Union. Classical crises in the European Union are consequences of the enlargement of the European Union. How is possible to assimilate through the European Union new countries that decide to become member of the institutional system? How is possible to transform new treaties? The classical response of this classical risk in the European Union, or crisis in the European Union, has been always, the response has been more Europe. How is possible to respond to the necessity to assimilate all the Central or Eastern countries in the institutions? Well, more Europe. Or the countries of South of Europe, more Europe. But the current crisis is different. It's different for 3-4 key questions. One, in my view, is for our own weaknesses in the European Union. Our architecture is very complicated to manage in terms of taking decisions. Second, is the consequences of the social crisis, the mismanagement of some problems relating with migrations or relating with fighting terrorism and so on. Anyway, we have an institutional system that doesn't work well. And that means that this system and these circumstances produce weaknesses. The second, in my view, in this moment is Brexit. Why? Because it's the first time that one country decides not to be a member of the European Union, but decide to leave the European Union. And it's not a small country, it's a very important country. And this is a very, very, very serious risk for the European Union, because this decision for the United Kingdom can follow for other countries in the European Union. And this is a very complicated factor to manage for Europeans. How is possible and to treat these circumstances of the Brexit and to negotiate it during years with our friends of the UK, the terms of this decision. Anyway, this decision means the beginning of our serious risk to division of Europe, and that means a serious risk existential for Europe. And third, in sum, is the new American administration. The new American administration is elected in this complicated landscape, but the new American administration sent, relating Europe, several messages. We can understand this message. One message is, we support Brexit. That means we support the beginning of the division, or the possibility of the division of the European Union. Second, we don't like the European Union. You don't like the current architectural existence, historical existence of the European Union. Third, in terms of security, we consider that NATO is an obsolete organization. What means that? The consequence is the classical relation, transatlantic relation, that is the base of the international order created after the Second World War and after the Cold War, with all its nuances, are as well a risk. This is the reason because we live in an existential crisis in Europe. We must add all the circumstances, all the questions that Senator Mitchell relating with nuclear threats, with the situation in North Korea, and so on. But so far, you can say that we Europeans must reflect about this. How is possible to happen? How is possible to do for us? My personal position and my idea is that if you respond of this situation, of this challenge, with the classical answer, more Europe, that means the explosion of the European Union. People don't accept this. Because a consequence of all this crisis is that populism and nationalism rise in the European Union. With all my respects, but Brexit is an expression of nationalism and populism in the European Union. We have recently celebrated the election in Netherlands. Fortunately, moderated parties win the election, but continue the advance of the populist forces. And don't forget that in a parliament with 150 seats, there are representation of 12 parties. 12 parties. That means that politically the world is going to a very big fragmentation. We live in a social fragmentation, cultural fragmentation, technological fragmentation, fragmentation in media, fragmentation as well in politics. Second, we have next election in France. It is possible that in France, Front National and Madame Le Pen win the election. The answer for the first time is yes, it's possible. It's sure, no. It's probably, I don't know, but it's possible. Before, it is impossible. Today, it's possible. And what means, what happened in Europe if Le Pen wins the election? If Le Pen wins the election, the European Union is finished. Because maybe the European Union can resist Brexit, but the European Union cannot resist Brexit more Frexit. This is impossible. And that means that the European Union disappears, Eurozone disappears. This landscape is not only a problem for Europeans. It's only a problem for the Americans. Europe is a serious problem for the world in general, because one of the success of the world is after the Second World War is we are capable to establish under the leadership of the U.S. a kind of international liberal order with, in the case of the European Union, with European communities in the beginning, with NATO, with International Monetary Fund, with World Bank, with all the with our allies as Japan, Australia, and other allies in the world. But this is the base, the core. If you lose this, the world will be more problematic. And I say, if someone understands that the response of this crisis in the European Union must be more Europe, I think he is wrong. But if someone thinks that the response can be more nationalism, the division of the European Union, more populism in the European Union, I think he is totally wrong. I think the intelligent answer for this situation in Europe is to try to reform the European Union, rebuild our institutional system, and created the possible Europe. How is, in my view, the possible Europe? Possible Europe is a Europe focused in key questions. We have the possibility to decentralize some powers to national states, but focus in key questions, and that advance in complete some very important policies. For instance, banking union, energy policy, single market, and promote free trade. To establish an ambitious idea for the European Union, but transform the institutional system of the European Union. This is, in my view, a margin of the European possible. The other thing is how it's possible to manage the situation with the current American administration. Well, we must to define these questions in Europe, and we must to redefine the question relating with security. Unfortunately, we have lost the opportunity to have the TTIP agreement that will be a very impressive free trade area in the world. But we must to make a huge effort to keep in NATO, because NATO is totally basic in terms of security.